All right, let's get into it. In just a couple of decades, the United States completely flipped the script, going from a country focused on its own backyard to a full-blown global empire. So how on earth did that happen? We're going to trace that incredible journey from the Spanish-American War all the way through the end of the Great War. If you're prepping for the APUSH exam, you are definitely in the right place.
Okay, so this question right here, this is the big one. It's really the key to understanding this entire period of American history. For most of the 1800s, the U.S. was all about manifest destiny, pushing west. It was focused inward. So what changed? What was the spark? Let's dig in and find out.
So our story really kicks off when America starts to look past its own shores for the very first time. The American frontier was officially closed. So all that ambition and all those economic interests, they needed to go somewhere new.
Now, as you can see from this timeline, this whole shift started kind of slowly. It began with these key moves in the Pacific that really set the stage for everything that came later. What everyone first called Seward's folly, buying Alaska, well, it pretty quickly started to look like a genius move. And then in Hawaii, you can see how American business interests led directly to a political takeover, giving the U.S. an absolutely critical naval base right in the middle of the Pacific.
Now, you absolutely cannot understand this period without talking about the media. And the term you have got to know for your exam is yellow journalism. Honestly, just think of it as the original clickbait. You had these newspaper titans, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, and they were in this brutal war for readers. And they figured out that crazy, sensational headlines sold a ton of newspapers, whether they were, completely true or not. And this is the perfect example of that power in action. When the U.S. battleship Maine mysteriously exploded in Havana Harbor back in 1898, the newspapers didn't wait for an investigation. Nope, they immediately started printing these screaming headlines that blamed Spain, and it just whipped the American public into a frenzy. The pressure was so intense that it basically forced President McKinley and Congress into a war they didn't really want.
And that war, the Spanish-American War, was super short. It only lasted a few months. But whoa, its consequences were massive. It totally reshaped America's place in the world. The Secretary of State at the time, John Hay, wasn't kidding when he called it a splendid little war.
So get this. In the span of just a few months, the U.S. goes from 0 overseas colonies to suddenly having an empire. The Treaty of Paris handed over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. This was a whole new ballgame. We're talking colonialism, and it kicked off this huge, bitter debate right here at home.
So, on one side, you had the pro-imperialists. They argued that America had this, moral duty to govern these new territories. They saw it as a civilizing mission, a responsibility to bring progress and Christianity to the people of the Philippines and Puerto Rico.
But then you have the anti-imperialists, and we're talking big names here, like Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie. They fired back, saying that owning colonies totally violated America's core values of liberty and self-government. Their argument was, how can you be a republic that was founded on freedom while you're also ruling over other people against their will?
Well, this whole debate led to a massive legal question. Does the Constitution follow the flag? In other words, do people in these new territories get the same rights as American citizens? The Supreme Court answered with a series of rulings called the insular cases, and they basically said, nope, not automatically. These new places were considered possessions, not future states, which meant their people did not get full constitutional rights.
Okay, so America is now officially an imperial power. And this is where President Theodore Roosevelt storms onto the world stage, totally ready to flex the nation's new muscles. Roosevelt absolutely believed in using American power to shape what was happening around the globe.
Now, this slide is so important because it shows this huge shift from a defensive attitude to an offensive one. The old Monroe Doctrine was basically a giant keep-out sign for Europe. The Roosevelt corollary, though, it added a little footnote that said, and by the way, if there's any trouble down here, we'll handle it. It basically made the U.S. an international police power in the Americas.
Roosevelt's whole foreign policy was summed up by that famous phrase, speak softly and carry a big stick. And as you can see here, he was not afraid to use that stick. Whether it was helping create Panama just so we could build the canal, or sending the entire U.S. battleship fleet on a friendly world tour, Roosevelt was all about projecting American strength. So despite this new role as a world power, America really tried to stay out of Europe's Great War, what we now call World War I. President Woodrow Wilson declared that the U.S. would be strictly neutral. But, well, events had other plans.
You can just see how U.S. neutrality got chipped away piece by piece.
First, the sinking of the Lusitania turns public opinion against Germany. Still, Wilson wins re-election on the promise of peace. But then, the Zimmermann telegram, where Germany tries to get Mexico to attack the U.S., that was a huge provocation. And when Germany went back to sinking any and all ships, that was pretty much the last straw. U.S. entry into the war was basically inevitable.
So for Wilson, this is the key. He didn't frame going to war as being about gaining territory or power. He framed it in these very idealistic terms. In his speech to Congress, he argued that this was a moral crusade, a fight to protect democracy from German aggression.
But the war's end didn't exactly bring peace and quiet back home. In fact, it sparked another huge debate. The government cracked down hard on civil liberties with the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which severely limited free speech, and the Supreme Court said that was okay. At the same time, Wilson's dream project, the League of Nations, designed to prevent future wars, was totally shot down by the Senate. They were afraid it would drag the U.S. into Europe's problems forever. So in this incredible twist, America just fought to reshape the world and then decided to retreat from it. All right, you ready? Let's do a quick rapid-fire review to make sure all these key ideas are locked in. I'm going to ask a question, pause for a second, and see if you can nail the answer. Let's go.
That, of course, is yellow journalism. Just think Hearst, Pulitzer, and remember the Maine.
That was a big addition to the Monroe Doctrine. Yep, it basically changed that Keep Out sign into America's new badge as the Hemisphere's policeman.
Okay, you had three main options here: the sinking of the Lusitania, the Zimmermann telegram, or Germany restarting its unrestricted submarine warfare. If you got any two of those, you are golden.
They decided that the Constitution does not automatically follow the flag. This was a big deal. It meant people in new territories like Puerto Rico and the Philippines didn't get full constitutional rights. They were subjects, not citizens.
And we end with the big one. This is the essential question of this whole era, and it's something historians still argue about. Was this a moment where America betrayed its founding principles, or was it just fulfilling its destiny on a global stage? There's no easy answer, and that's exactly what makes this period so fascinating to study. Thanks so much for watching.